Hello! In the next few minutes, we will be discussing how the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or BSP, promotes its primary mandate of maintaining price stability. Around the world, the consensus among economists and policymakers is that the primary objective of central banks should be to achieve price stability. Thus, since the 1990s, more and more countries have granted institutional independence to their central banks and enacted laws that committed the central bank's monetary policy to achieving low and stable inflation. Here in the Philippines, Republic Act No. 11-11, which amends Republic Act No. 7653, otherwise known as the New Central Bank Act, specifically tasked the BSP to promote price stability conducive to balanced and sustainable growth of the economy and employment. Again, that is the BSP's primary objective, to maintain price stability. But you might be thinking, in an economy, prices of goods and services are always changing, right? So does this mean that the BSP will never be able to achieve its price stability objective? Before we answer that question, two important points have to be stressed to better appreciate what price stability is. First, we must understand that the price we are referring to pertains to the average or general price level of goods and services consumed by a typical Filipino household and not the individual prices of these commodities. Some prices rise, some prices fall. So even if the prices of some commodities increase substantially, as long as the average price level is not changing too rapidly, there is still price stability. Second, price stability does not mean that prices are not changing. The average price level in the economy can still move, but as long as it is not changing abruptly, substantially, or unpredictably, then there is still price stability. In short, price stability happens when the price changes are minimal and not erratic. Now, why is price stability important? One important reason why you want to achieve price stability is that it increases certainty in decision-making of both households and firms. Studies have shown that when prices are low and stable, households and businesses are able to arrive at better informed decision-making about their consumption, investment, saving, and production needs. If people are confident that the prices of goods and services will not be changing too much, they can plan their saving, investment, and spending more efficiently. For example, when prices are stable, manufacturers are protected against risk related to the changing cost of raw materials and finished goods. Uncertainty is lessened, and firms can price their products competitively, since risks like a sudden rise in the cost of raw materials are reduced. The second reason why we want to have price stability is that it preserves the purchasing power of our money. When prices rise fast, the value of our money erodes faster, and we will be able to buy fewer and fewer goods and services with the same amount of money. For example, a basket of goods and services costs 100 pesos today. If the inflation rate is 5%, you would have to pay 105 pesos for the basket of goods and services for the following year. And if the inflation rate remains at 5% in the next years, you will have to pay around 128 pesos in 5 years' time for exactly the same basket of goods and services. When inflation remains high, it means prices are increasing sharply, which in turn erodes significantly the value of our money. Your next question may be, how are prices measured? And how does the BSP monitor whether prices are stable or not? The answer, we use the concepts of Consumer Price Index or CPI and inflation. The price of basket of commodities in our example earlier is actually a measure of CPI. The CPI represents the general price level since it is the average price of the standard basket of goods and services consumed by a typical Filipino household for a given period. This standard basket contains hundreds of consumption items such as food products, clothing, water, and electricity, whose prices are monitored and consolidated into one price for the country, represented as an index. Now, the inflation rate is computed as the annual percentage increase in the CPI. As such, it represents the rate of change in the general price level. In our previous example, it is the rate of increase in price, which is 5%. What this means is that inflation directly measures price stability. And when there is low and stable inflation, there is price stability. Please note that the BSP gets inflation data from the Philippine Statistics Authority or PSA. The PSA is the government agency that produces and releases various economic data, including CPI and inflation rate. At this point, you might be wondering, how does the BSP achieve low and stable inflation? The BSP keeps inflation low and stable by influencing the availability and cost of money and credit in our country to influence aggregate demand through the conduct of monetary policy. For example, too much money circulating in the economy could cause both households and businesses' demand for commodities to increase faster relative to supply. If the BSP assesses that this could lead to higher inflation, the BSP will implement appropriate monetary policy to combat the potential rise in prices to keep the inflation low and stable. Now we'll look into the BSP's monetary policy framework to combat inflation in the country. Have you heard of inflation targeting? Under this framework, the national government sets and the BSP announces an explicit inflation target that the BSP commits to achieve over a period of time. To achieve the inflation target, the BSP uses various monetary policy tools to influence money supply and the cost of borrowing money. In this discussion, we will focus on the BSP's main monetary policy tool, which is the key policy interest rate. The overnight reverse repurchase or RRP rate signals the BSP's monetary policy stance. The RRP rate is the rate at which the BSP borrows money from banks in the country. Yes, you heard it right. The BSP borrows from banks to influence the money supply in the country and ultimately inflation. The decision on the monetary policy stance, or whether to raise, reduce, or maintain the BSP's key policy rate, considers the inflation outlook for the target period and the risk to inflation. Specifically, the Monetary Board, chaired by the BSP Governor, meets regularly to discuss key economic developments and indicators that could significantly affect inflation, and to assess if the prevailing monetary policy stance is still appropriate. The decision on whether the key policy rate should be unchanged, increased, or decreased depends on the assessment of the policy-making body. For example, if the BSP sees the future inflation will be higher than the target, the Monetary Board may decide to increase the key policy rate. Consequently, banks' interest rate will likely follow the increase. Now, higher interest rates will make borrowing more costly and hence reduce demand for both businesses and household loans. Consumption growth will then be slower because part of the public's disposable income will go to higher interest payments. Also, there is a strong incentive to save rather than to spend because of the higher interest rate. A rise in interest rate also makes it more expensive for firms to finance investments. Hence, investment growth will be slower. With slower consumption and investment growth, aggregate or total demand growth will also be slower. Price pressures will ease, inflation will be lower. Our example simply says that any change in the BSP's monetary policy stance affects the decisions of households and businesses as to their consumption, investment, saving, and production. These adjustments will have an impact on the overall demand for goods and services and ultimately on inflation. Just so you know, whatever the monetary policy decisions of the BSP and its outlook for future inflation are, these are relayed to the public. Under the inflation targeting framework, the BSP must communicate its policy actions to the general public for transparency and accountability. Relevant reports, press releases are provided to the different media, including the BSP's official website and social media accounts. In addition, communication and credibility are crucial in anchoring inflation expectations. If the BSP is credible as a central bank, its monetary policy decisions will influence expectations in a way that boosts confidence that inflation will be in line with the target. And ultimately, all of this help the BSP achieve its primary mandate of maintaining price stability. As we end this discussion, please bear in mind that as the BSP exercises its power to influence inflation, it ensures that its actions remain supportive of economic growth. With managed inflation, higher level of savings and investment is encouraged, greater productive activities are promoted, and job opportunities are increased. All of this help to improve the well-being of Filipinos. If you want to learn more about price level, inflation, and monetary policy, go to our website at www.bsp.gov.ph and follow us on social media.